Welcome to Conversation Oasis. This is a weekly free-flowing chat show here on Radio Robin Hood, coming to you from the Kasviskeidas restaurant in the centre of Turku. I'm your compere David Mawby, and joining us again today we have our regular host and owner of the restaurant, Jalen. Welcome. And also we have as a special guest someone who's off to another country, Lauri from here in Turku. Lauri, can you tell us where you're going to and what you're going to do there? Because normally we usually have immigrants on the program who have come to this country. You are a Finn going out into the brave world.
Well, I was in a job interview to a job in Tallinn. Basically, I'm teaching. I just graduated from university and got my master's thesis, and after that I was looking for jobs during the summer, and I noticed this one teaching position in Tallinn's Finnish school, where they go by the Finnish curriculum, and basically it's a completely Finnish school in Tallinn. And I got to know that I'm going to be teaching there about a week ago, and within this week I have to find an apartment and do quite a lot of things, fill some papers, and well, there's all kinds of stuff that I need to do this week as well. So I'm a bit excited, not necessarily worried, but excited and hopefully I will get an apartment so I don't have to live in a hostel for a long time or something like this.
Well, we hope that too. In fact, it raises many questions about when you go to another country, what are the sort of things that you have to consider before you actually make the decision to move there? There must be a very, very long list. What's been on your list apart from getting an apartment?
Well, it's I noticed that well, it's quite expensive, of course, the first or the start when you move somewhere, because you have to pay for the apartment, and there's fees related to that, and then especially when I'm starting a new job, I needed to buy a new computer and some new clothes as well, because I don't want to go with my regular worn out clothes to the to a teaching position. No. So there's quite a lot of, you have to be prepared to have some costs first, and I don't know, I want to learn the language, and I've tried to find some courses, but it's surprisingly hard already, even though I know the language is like somewhat common to Finnish, and they all speak English, but still finding information is surprisingly hard, so I haven't had this point of view before, ever. And it's not like the most far away place, so I can only imagine if you come from, I don't know, if you're an exchange student coming from China or whatever, or if a refugee from Syria, then trying to fill out these forms and understand the whole bureaucracy and culture is
yeah, and we're talking about a country. If you go up in one of these hot air balloons that goes above Turku every evening in the summertime, you could probably actually see the coastline of Estonia from there. So there was quite a long list there. Apart from getting an apartment, you need money to buy clothes. You have all the bureaucracy, which of course is perhaps easier for an EU citizen, because Estonia is also an European Union member as well. How have you managed with the bureaucracy, or has your employer helped you out?
Yeah, she has helped me out. There's actually, maybe talking about bureaucracy was a bit misleading, since there isn't much of it, but because I can work, I don't need a permit, for example, to work there.
No.
But I also have to, there's some, actually the bureaucracy comes from the Finnish side, because I need to have a Finnish insurance, or what's it called, from Kela, this European travel insurance or whatever.
Yeah, European, yes, from the Social Security institution.
Yeah,
yes.
And then I need to pay the
Come on, we'll help you
retirement money,
yeah, the retirement
to
payment,
Finland.
yes.
And I'll pay the taxes to Estonia. That's not very complicated, but everything that comes to Finland is a bit like
is a bit difficult. Yes.
Yeah, it's a bit.
So you're going to pay the flat 20% rate of taxation in Estonia.
Yeah, that's what I'm going to pay. Plus, was it 3% or 2% of retirement money to Finland?
Okay, you're off to Tallinn. You're going to be a teacher in the Finnish school in the capital of Estonia. Tell me, apart from what Finns usually know about Estonia, have you been to Estonia or Tallinn before?
This is the part that I wanted to look at. It's a cultural side of this moving temporarily to Estonia. In the world now we are living, the borders seem to be disappearing, but in the other hand, they are fighting for the borders, Russia or Middle East, and in this world that there is a mass immigration. And this immigration tells me that the borders are disappearing. So what are your anticipations? Because if we look at Europe, there are West Europe, East Europe, and Estonia is one of those Eastern European countries. Are you worried that you go to one of these Eastern European countries that the standard of life or probably the law is still a little bit different? Or because Estonia is close to you, you have less awareness, and if you would move to, for example, France or Germany, you would consider...
No, not really. I'm not worried about that. I think most places in the world, especially Estonia, it's sort of a combination of the West and East, East Europe, even more than Finland is. I think there are some Eastern European elements in Finland as well, but I won't go into that in more detail. But
that takes a whole program.
Yeah, but
I suppose you have less awareness because still you work within the Finnish law in the Finnish school with the Finnish children. If it was within an Estonian education system or Estonian students,
then I would have to probably learn a lot more, and I have this is sort of the easiest way to work in another country, and I haven't lived myself. I've only lived in Turku my whole life, so it's going to be a bit differently, even though it's close, but it's still. Were you talking about this Eastern Europe or this? So there's. It's not as sort of stable, or that's what the image we have, maybe.
I suppose for most of European, the Western European, if they want to move to Eastern European country, they have more things to consider to be worried than Western European countries. I think they are considering the Western European country, the social law and the regularities are mostly similar.
Yeah.
But I mentioned this because as we see in European Union, when they want to make the law for European Union, they are considering all about the money, economical part, and political part. But nobody really paid that much attention to the common standard of education. And if there is an education system best, why we don't expand it to the other European? And in the end, education is our goal to grow common values, to grow, to evolve together.
Yeah, and I know it's what I know about education in Estonia. Obviously, it's going to be different for me, but in there it's more conservative. That I know for a fact. And for example, in university here, you can almost take any subject. It's not as free. Also, there's you have to pay in the university. I don't remember how much it was, but in Finland it's basically free, the university training. And there are a lot of differences in that sense, especially in the education system. It's not as developed. But like I said, it's going to be a bit different for me because I'm going to teach by the Finnish curriculum. But apart from that, all this talk about what comes to my mind is maybe sort of security or crime and stuff like this. There is more of this in Estonia, but it's not a very. I wouldn't say I would be. I haven't even thought about that actually, but
I guess Tallinn is pretty safe at
yeah,
night.
it is pretty safe. It's also changed quite a lot in the last 15 years or so.
Yeah,
and but related to that, remember a few years ago there was a TV program where they were traveling with motorcycles or something, and this was I don't know, some sort of project where they had basically no money, or they had some very little funds, and for the most part they noticed that most of the world is somewhat safe, or even the dangerous places you usually don't get into a deep, like terrible situations.
Yeah.
And I'm not talking about, obviously there are war zones like Syria, and those places are not safe. They are not safe in a way, but it's maybe when we travel somewhere we hear about how unsafe some places. It's not always very realistic or statistically.
Well, Brazil comes to mind, especially Rio de Janeiro. It's a very, very dangerous place.
Caracas.
And you know, parts of South America. I often think it's a case of luck. The only place where I had my wallet successfully stolen happened to be London, so rather than Mexico or Brazil.
London is an exceptional city in Europe also. It's a little bit different order in London.
And it's also the same for me. I've only been robbed in Finland.
Oh yeah, you told me that.
Yeah, my wallet my bag got stolen. Yeah, but nobody was threatening me or anything. But that's the only place where someone stole something from me.
Yeah. Well, summer is still a little bit. You lost them in summer, and summer is a little bit more, different atmosphere. People drink and they look probably sometimes a little bit fishy around.
Yeah, what worries me
that.
most is maybe Finnish people in Estonia, because I have I've been there, obviously I've been there doing the same thing as well earlier. But
now, listeners, I think what they're going around in circles here. What they're saying is that Elauri is saying, yes, he's been to Tallinn before on a boat, and I can tell you, as I'm sure most listeners know, things do happen on the boats between Helsinki and Tallinn.
Yeah, but I've also, because I have friends in Tallinn, so that's a good thing. But I've noticed sort of through their eyes, when I've been with them, I sort of witnessed this flood of Finnish people coming in. It's like a horde of, sometimes it makes me laugh because it's like a horde of like
if it's any consolation, I can tell you there's one place, there are two places I will avoid in the south of Europe. One is Benidorm in Spain, and the other is Albufeira in Portugal, because they are full of Brits. And if I've ever found myself in Albufeira and I'm with a Finnish friend, puhutaan suomea keskenään, we talk Finnish together rather than be mistaken for English and get arrested. But you won't have any problems like that. You'll be a fine, upstanding teacher.
As you said, Estonia has been changed during the last 15 years, and it's much safer. The security and environment has become more like Finnish environment. But if we go back to the education part of the issue, don't you believe that in the end, in European Union, we should have common education system?
I think there should be, if you're asking me, then yes, there should be common elements of education, but I think that when it comes to national history, we would be making a terrible mistake if they were ever left out of the curriculum. For instance, what has happened in Finland in the last 200 years is totally different to what has happened in Hungary in the last 200 years, not to mention Spain or Italy, and let alone France, and well, we don't have to include Britain because they won't be there much longer in the European Union.
But it's sort of like there's been this talk about the teaching of religion in school, or how we should teach it. In my experience, I've noticed that these days it's mostly very secular. So even if they say like Christianity or whatever, they're teaching religion, it's more in a sense of, my point will come later, but I have to to work on it a bit.
Well,
I lost my train of thought.
While you get your train of point back, let me just remind listeners that you're listening to Conversation Oasis, coming to you from the Kasviskeidas restaurant in the centre of Turku. My guests are Jalal, our host here, and we're talking also to Lauri, who's off to Tallinn to teach in the Finnish school there.
Yeah, so now I can explain the point that I had earlier. You were talking about national history. It's the same thing as with religion, is that when you understand this culture, you can understand certain types of myths that are always repeat themselves in different cultures in different forms. So when you know one form of religion, it's easier to understand other forms as well. In my opinion, it's sort of the same with national history. If it's taught well, that it's.
But how much that will affect our future? And with the new science we have, and new generation is looking forward to the science and information, how far we can hold on to the history and religion or this part of our identity. And the second point is that if we want to have European Union as one union, working together, living together side by side, common education is very essential.
Well, I'd like to come back to you on that. I think that, for instance, if we take a look at one united part of the world, the United States of America, I wouldn't want the southern states of the United States to forget what they did to Afro-Americans over the years, during the years of slavery. And therefore I think it's absolutely essential that we here in the European Union learn more about each other's past, and also the history of our next door neighbour Russia, because the more we understand the way the Russians think, the more likely we are to have a peaceful existence next to our neighbour. I think those 2 points are essential. The more we know about each other, the better. On the other hand, we shouldn't let history dominate us. I mean, but I think that the more we know about our own history, for instance, what happened in World War II, then I think we are less likely to make the same mistakes in the future. And God help us if we ever do and try and make those mistakes again. I'm talking about the rise of Nazism and fascism, for example.
Yeah, I agree with that. It seems that the less people know about history, or the less they understand it, the more also judgmental they can be towards it, which usually, in my opinion, this sort of judgmentality leads to, it's a general mindset that can lead to terrible results. Or it can
but does that answer your question? I'm not so sure that was your point.
That's my point, but with the speed of the changes we have nowadays, for me, it's better to forget the long memory of history than we focus more like the short memory, because nobody think of doing things like as Second World War.
Are you sure? Have you read the headlines in this lately?
Forget about Middle East or
no, I'm talking about Finland.
European Union. And today's standards, the human mentality, the standard of the mentality is different. It's more human. Nobody can think of torturing people that way that the Nazi Germany did to people, and nobody can stand looking at another person that slim, that bony, and just still continue torturing him.
We're not talking about torture, but I'm talking about verbal abuse in the street if you come from another culture. That is practiced every day, not only in Finland, but in Hungary, in Britain, and so on. And it's because there are certain people who are not so well educated who would like to go back to the past times when society was more authoritarian. And we always think of Germany as being very authoritarian, as it was under Nazism, but the rest of Europe was also much more stricter in terms of social and moral codes than it is today. Do we wish to go back to that? There are some people who preach that doctrine even here in Finland, and if you don't know that, then you're not really following the news.
Yeah, I know that, but when I say the common education in European Union, So, and you mentioned that this part of the history we should remember. But how far? First of all, they are not just exclusively in Europe. European Union has happened all over the world. We have the same things in the history: war, killing, torture, and things.
Yes.
So, in the book of history, we can read more about the world history, or probably, especially more about the European history. But how much we should hold on to this? Isn't it like we better to look for the future than looking back all the time?
Yeah, no problem there. I have no problem with that whatsoever, as long as we do not commit the same mistakes that were made in the past because we were ignorant of the fact that they took place once before.
This whole phenomenon of how I think like psychologically fascism and stuff like this rises is you don't necessarily accept the evil in your own culture or in yourself. No. So put it outside somewhere. There's someone outside of you that's to blame for whatever. So for the Nazis it was the Jews, for the Serbians, and
if you look at what is going on now, that's why I say that we should focus more on education and common education standard. If you look at the things what is happening now, isn't it like that? The most of people who are Nazis, who are voting for Brexit or voting for Trump, they are mostly uneducated rural people. Isn't it like that? It was in news, according to the numbers, Brexit was mostly supported by rural people who were low educated people. And also in United States, he was voted by mostly rural people. And what is that? What is making you a Nazi or a racist? It's fear. Fear of what?
Yes, I go with that.
People often talk that you came here to take my job. If everybody is secured, if we have a good education system, if we have a good governmental system, and everybody is secured financially, everybody is secured with job, do you think still we have this much racist and Nazi idea and things like that?
So what you're saying is that if you're someone from the countryside, then you are some kind of ignoramus that doesn't know anything.
I don't say that. This
the inference is there. The inference is there, and to say that a lot of people, that many people voted for Brexit were from the countryside in England. They came from many parts of urban Britain that were great tea drinkers, as we hear here as well. They were not only great tea drinkers, but they were urban dwellers who were nervous of seeing a rapid influx of people from other cultures, who didn't speak their language, who didn't have their own little British ways, and so on. You have to understand these people, but of course it's no excuse for any kind of torture, whether it be physical or mental, as it has been. Now, as for Trump, I'm not an expert on US politics at all, but I can say this, that I have the nasty feeling that there was a lot of media manipulation involved, not by Russia, but by Fox News and other Murdoch-controlled outlets, and also it was a backlash, regrettably, against the fact that there was a decent-minded man in the White House for 8 years who got lots of things wrong.
But still he's Republican, and Republicans are more supported in southern states than northern states.
Yeah, that has been the case since the days of Nixon, yes.
I could return this to Estonia.
Please do.
But it's sort of on the same topic, because Estonia has quite an interesting history, being a very small country and being invaded by Russia or the Soviet Union for a long time, or part of the Soviet Union, and before that there was this,
occupied,
occupied, and before that there was these sort of right-wing movements as well in the 30s that they were also in Finland, Equal and Lapland. So there are some similarities, but on another hand, I think Estonians they don't, from what I understood, there's very little refugees and they don't take them. And there's this interesting fear of anything maybe foreign except for Finnish people. Well, Finnish people are poros there, but it's not necessarily a fear. But this fear of and I think it could come from the history of being occupied for a long time by this Russian state. So
but still, they have one of the biggest minority. They have Russian.
Yeah, it's
and
one of
they are not as afraid as Russian and as they are afraid from Middle Eastern.
Yeah.
In Poland, they don't stand any Middle Eastern, but on any dark hair. But they are living side by side with Russian.
But it's living. They are living side by side, but I don't know where this stems from or where it's coming from.
It's not an easy coexistence, is it?
Yeah,
no.
It's not an easy coexistence at all. And there's actually quite a lot of, when I talk with Estonian people, they are somewhat suspicious of the Russian minority. So the Russians are a bit, even though it's like 15% or 20%.
It depends on whereabouts you are. I think
Yeah.
that in some parts of Estonia, especially in the east, there is a majority of Russian speakers. I would only hope that the Estonian people, Estonian-speaking people in that country would realize that it was the system that oppressed them and not necessarily the individual Russian speakers who were forced against their will to go to Estonia in the days of Joseph Stalin. But if we go down that lane of discussion, we're going to have to be here for another program, and we only have 1.5 minutes left.
Okay.
But the point is not that it wasn't the Russian people, but still culturally, Russian people behave differently in that environment, in that country than Estonian themselves. So it's like in a traffic jam, in roads, Russians are driving. Culturally, they are driving a little bit out of law, or they are a little bit more courageous to fight. I have to put it that way.
Yeah.
So it's a little bit different.
If I have to wrap something up, I would say that probably from this conversation as well, which was a bit out there as well, it's something that I can gather is going to be interested to see what it's actually like versus these.
Exactly, yes.
These. I'm not an expert on the issue at all. This is just like me talking from my.
Well, we're going to put it. Can you come back and see us in 6 months' time when you've had some experience there, and we can talk about how you're surviving in Estonia? I'm afraid, folks, we're going to have to cut this off. I can only say to Jale, welcome to North London sometime, and then you'll see some real Russian-style driving. If you think that's bad, you haven't been in North London and some of the arguments that I have witnessed on visits there. Mm-hmm. However, I'd like to thank you both, Jale and Lauri, for joining us for this edition of Conversation Oasis. We'll hopefully be back with you in a week's time. I won't be back for a month, so in the meantime, do tune in to Radio Robin Hood for this free flow program broadcast at these times every week here. From all of us here at the Kasviskeidas restaurant in the centre of Turku, a very good day to you, and hear from you again next week.